All right, so this is we're leaving off from our last thing. I think we left off here with Lyndon B. Johnson. All right, so again, as we talk about TechGen, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson. Johnson is going to dramatically escalate the war. Truman starts it, has a little bit of a presence. Eisenhower picks up a little bit. Kennedy picks up even more, but Johnson blows it out of the water. You're talking about 500,000 troops being sent to Vietnam. Again, President Johnson had these plans for the 60s. As we talked about with President Kennedy way back a couple weeks ago, about how poverty was a huge problem in the 60s. Um, Lyndon Johnson wanted to be considered the next great American president, the same level as Lincoln and FDR. He wanted to fix poverty and civil rights issues, but Vietnam is going to consume his presidency. Basically will ruin it. All the money, all the resources will be allocated for Vietnam. And unfortunately, a lot of his domestic policies and agenda will have to be put on hold. Eventually will ruin him. As I said, the media is going to expose a lot of the problems that are going on. As a matter of fact, a little story about that. The media starts publishing dead American bodies and really starts to contradict what the generals, commanders, and what LBJ is saying. They're all saying, we're winning the war. We're going to win. We'll be done in 6 months or we'll be done in a year. And, body count, we're killing a lot more of them than what they're killing of us. The media starts kind of questioning that. They start putting stories that kind of contradict what they're saying. And so Johnson calls in this one of his buddies who was in charge of one of the large newspapers at the time, and basically said, "Hey, are you screwing me here? Because that's what they were basically doing. That the media was exposing the realities of the war, and there was a big disconnect. What was going on with commanders and generals and presidency, and what was going on the ground, boots on the ground in Vietnam, were two different things. Those that were on the ground were saying, "Well, this is tough. I don't know if we have any chance of winning this war." But the commanders, generals, and the president Johnson kept saying, "Oh, we're doing fine. Things are gonna be good. We're gonna send more troops, send more troops, send more troops." And sending more troops wasn't the answer, guys. That was the fix for it. That okay, our bombs aren't working. This isn't working. So let's just send more boots on the ground. That was their. We're American. We don't lose. Kind of a cockiness, so to speak. That they couldn't come to grips with that little tiny Vietnam that didn't have the same capabilities that we did, technologically and militarily, was able to put a fight against us. And it got to the point where we got so deep in Vietnam where we couldn't pull out. And we'll talk more about that later. So I'll leave you with that. All right, so it's kind of showcasing you guys this. Here's a little kind of map showcasing 1962. So these two are JFK. You see we have 10,000 maybe troops there, advisors. But notice the thing starts going up. So this is where LBJ, he increased it a little bit more for JFK in 64, 65. This is where it's really his first term where he wins election. Notice we have over 100,000 troops. And look what's happened in 1968. 525,000 troops being sent to Vietnam. So you see that. And then Nixon gets elected in 69, and you see that gradually starting to go down. So just kind of showcasing you guys with that, some of the involvement. All right, so who are we fighting? Names of the enemy. All right, so let's start with the first one, the NVA, also known as the North Vietnamese Army. So again, here is the DMV right here, this black line. The pink is North Vietnam. So the NVA was a North Vietnamese army. Now, again, what you need to understand is that, again, they're not a very powerful country, but they were being supplied by the Chinese. The Chinese was communist. North Vietnam is communist. So the Chinese were funneling in lots of weapons, money, aid into the North Vietnamese to fight. Also, the Soviets, same thing. They're communists. They're going to support through sending weapons and that kind of thing to the North Vietnamese. So although the North Vietnamese aren't on their own strong, they're being supplied by strong nations. They're getting AK-47s, M16s. They're getting the grenade launchers and all these different types of weapons that are more modernized weapons from these big superpowers to fight against us. So here's the DMV. They called it. I was watching a documentary on this. The DMV, the same thing. I'm sorry, the DMZ, the same thing as in Korea, that line that divides North and South Korea. Same thing, the DMZ. One of the Marines called it the Dead Marine Zone, because if you were a Marine and you were stationed in South Vietnam, close to the DMZ, close to the border, this was brutal. I mean, you're constantly going in combat with the North Vietnamese Army. The next military name you might have heard of, the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh were followers of Ho Chi Minh. They were communists. Um, basically the same thing as the NVA, basically. And then this one is the most feared group out of them all that Americans fought more with was the Viet Cong, also known as the VC. Now, this is where it's confusing. So you gotta have to kind of hang with me here and watch the map here. So again, here's the DMZ. North Vietnam was Soviet backed, Chinese backed. South Vietnam was U.S. backed. So we're helping the South Vietnamese. But the Viet Cong were South Vietnamese people, rebels, that didn't want us there. So that was the problem that we were experiencing, that we were fighting heavily against the NVA up here, but you had pockets all throughout the country, here, middle, down south, all over Vietnam, where the Viet Cong were using guerrilla warfare tactics and hitting us in pockets all through the jungle. And the problem was you couldn't see them. They weren't wearing army uniforms. They were farmers by day, and they would fight us at night. They would smile at American soldiers during the day, wave at us, take our help, and fight us at night. And that's an army that it's hard to win, that kind of battle. We're there to help them, and these people don't want our help. Now we'll get into why do they want our help in a little bit. So here's the thing too. Now, how do the Viet Cong, they're way down here, how are they being supplied? So there was something called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was right up to Ho Chi Minh, leader of North Vietnam, Uncle Ho, communist, whatever. There's a trail. It was cut through the jungles of Vietnam, all the way through Laos, right here. So follow my cursor here. It went right through here through Laos, and it went here into northern South Vietnam. It went in here, and it went way down here. So, guys, these were little pathways carved in the jungle. They would take machetes and they carved a little trail through the jungle. And they called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It led from North Vietnam into South, and you basically had those from the north would spill into the south and help supply them. They would pack rice buckets, rice barrels, carts full of things, and would pour them into South to help supply them. So that's how the South Vietnamese, that's how the Viet Cong were able to fight against us, because they were being supplied that way on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So some key people. You have General Westmoreland. He was a U.S. commander in Vietnam. He kept pushing Kennedy and several other key military generals that, hey, we need more troops. We need more troops. We need more troops. And eventually, President Johnson just caved in. At first, President Johnson wanted to use technology. He wanted to use the bombs. He wanted to use a small advisory force. That wasn't working. So they kept pushing more soldiers, and eventually turned into 500,000 soldiers by 1968. So strategy really wasn't working. And then obviously Ho Chi Minh, leader of Communist North Vietnam. Here's a very telling quote. You can kill 10 of our men, so Americans can kill 10 of our men, and we'll kill one of yours. But even at those odds, you will lose and we will win. Think about that. You can kill 10 of us, we'll kill one of you. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the Vietnamese were willing to sacrifice tens of millions of their people, fight to the last man if need be. That's a desperate person. How can you fight somebody who has that much to lose? So that's kind of what we're fighting up against. We're there to stop communism. They're there for independence. That's two totally different things. All right, and then you have this guy was very controversial, Ngo Dinh Diem. He was the president of South Vietnam. U.S. will help place him there, help back him. Now, why? Well, we didn't have a whole lot of good choices. The one thing that was going for him was that he was an anti-communist. He hated communists. So because of that and our containment policy, okay, we placed him into power. but he will become a very extremely disliked amongst the South Vietnamese people. He will rig the election to make sure that he ensures that he wins. He's a Catholic. Now, why is that a problem? Well, most of Vietnam was Buddhists, so you have a Catholic in charge of Buddhists. So he begins to arrest Buddhists. He begins to demolish Buddhist temples. He kills Buddhists. And also he was seen as an American puppet, like that we were basically controlling him. So he becomes very unpopular. Riots, protests break out all over South Vietnam that are protesting, his rules and his policies. Again, anti-Buddhist policies, and you'll see that which will lead into next is Quang Duc. Quang Duc was a Buddhist monk. He will go to the center of town and he'll set himself on fire to protest Diem, bring attention to what Diem is doing. Long story short, Diem will become assassinated in 1963. But think about why Quang Duc will do this. He wants to bring attention to it. When you first see this, you're thinking, why? Why would a guy go and set himself on fire and kill himself? He becomes a martyr, guys. He becomes somebody who's going to be worshipped and praised all throughout Vietnam after his death. That he's going to expose what Diem is doing to him and the people there, to where eventually the people are going to band together, rise up, and stop Diem, which will eventually lead to him being assassinated and killed. American strategy for fighting this war. Almost done, guys. So the main idea with our strategy is the term pacification. Our goal is to win the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese. We want to protect them from the Viet Cong. We want to get them on our side, build schools for them, build roads, electricity, water, hospitals, schools. You see some pictures here. That's our goal, is to pacify them, to win over their hearts and minds. However, that's not going to work, guys. It's not going to work for a variety of reasons. And I'll get to that here next. So one thing that's going to be very unpopular is something called these strategic hamlets. So throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the Viet Cong gained a huge presence, and they terrorized the South Vietnamese countryside. They recruited these villagers. They threatened the villagers, if you don't go with us, that we're going to come back and kill you once the Americans leave. So many of the villagers were afraid of the Viet Cong. But ultimately, this is what we did. These hamlets, the U.S. and Diem removed villagers from their homes and put them in compounds to protect them. Now think about that. U.S. and Diem are going to remove them from their homes. Guys, these homes were their livelihoods. Their lives were built around these, and they spent a lot of time building these little villages. We just remove them from them. We move them from their home. That's like somebody coming into your home and telling you that you need to leave to go somewhere else to be protected, and you can't come back. So many of these, although in theory and in practice we meant good, I guess, it ended up backfiring on us because they don't want to be removed from their homes. So you see this here. These were like hamlets. See, they're protected with like little bamboo sticks and guards on the outside, trying to keep them all safe. So you see these. So you see this wall compound where all the village was here. There were thousands of these things that were created. So although our intention was to help, it ended up making a lot of the villagers angry of what we were doing, removing them. So although this meant good, this became to be propaganda for the Viet Cong, that there were members of these villagers that became angry at us, and they joined the Viet Cong to get back at us. All right, so anyway, that is it for today. This is lesson 6. So there should be, again, these 2 videos here that are for the lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and make sure you have all of the assignments completed.